thank you to the university for the invitation. Very excited to meet all of our Durant scholars. You're already on an incredible path to success. And I want to thank my fellow speakers, Scott and Tyler, and especially if anyone was here for Andra's talk yesterday, I think that was a wonderful context for some of the themes I'm going to be exploring. So I'm very excited. Appreciate the biological introduction. I want to pose a question for you to hold in the back of your mind for the duration of this talk. And that is, what exists outside of the realm of question and answer? What is orthogonal to the binary of question and answer? And that's really where my work sits. So a lot of what I do is at the intersection of mechanical engineering, psychology, choreography, and storytelling. And I hope that it will provide a little bit of an introduction into how humanity comes into this field of technology, robotics, machine learning, as I'm sure I'll dictate today. So I want to start really briefly with an idea. So much of what you think and know and feel about robots is comprised of how you see them through story. And whether that story is movies or the media or a book that you've read, there's quite a bit of research that shows that pop culture has so much to do with your perception of new technologies. So is this a familiar face, right? Pretty familiar. We actually saw this in Andra's talk. This is an iteration of a robot a couple of decades ago, one that's slightly more recent, right? This is something that we heard Scott talk a little bit about. This is Black Mirror. This was inspired by Boston Dynamics' Spot Mini robot. Yeah, it's coming to kill you. That's the name of the story. And this is from Westworld, right? So we have these highly capable, sentient, we've exported consciousness, we've turned it into some sort of computer program, and we've put it into an embodiment of a human being, right? So this is IMDb's top 35 highest grossing movies about robots. 80% of those movies depict robots in a very violent fashion, yeah? This is highly problematic because it comes down and then percolates into the fear that you have about your daily life. I think Scott teed this up really nicely in saying that we had this swing of the pendulum towards fear. I'm actually going to show you some data points that we haven't quite recovered from that fear yet, right? 75% of Americans are afraid of robots. There was a Chapman University study in 2015. More Americans are afraid of robots than they are of death. That's a big, big problem, right? I can just say that statistic and you already know why that's an issue. Because so many roboticists, the goals that we have for robots are really to improve people's lives. And it's so hard to interface with a human being if they're entirely afraid, right? So it's not just the movies. The media is not doing much better. This is the Spot Mini. Again, we had this video that came out on YouTube, and everyone was in a big hoopla. Vice Media, The Guardian, Mashable, they were all saying these robots can open doors. They're going to come open your door in your bedroom in the middle of the night, and life will end as we know it. Same goes for Vice, right? Huge problem. And the reason why this is an issue, fear is normal, first of all. Every new technology introduces some type of fear. When movies first came out, there was a big speeding train. That was one of the first scenes in a movie, and people fell out of their seats. They were so terrified. They thought that a train was going to come out and just hit them square in the forehead. It's not actually what happens, yeah? So fear is totally normal. The problem with when we divert from fear immediately into violence, conflict between human beings is inevitable. Violence is a choice. Conflict is inevitable. Violence is a choice. And fear is not only dangerous, it can also be completely untrue, right? We don't see the full context of what's happening here. You know, there's someone standing behind that robot with a remote control, yeah? They don't include that in the video. It's been this highly doctored, beautifully oriented video to make you feel a certain way. Yeah, Andra kind of referred to this similarly in her talk yesterday. And when people are afraid, StoryCorps founder Dave Isay had a great quote where he said, fear inhibits action. If I'm afraid, I don't participate, right? I don't bring my skills to the field. I don't provide the contributions that I'm capable of bringing. And the future becomes less inclusive when we all sit back and decide that we're afraid. Who benefits from you being scared? It's another question I want you to think about. So we have this opportunity. There's actually an enormous opportunity to provide positive renditions of robots, positive narratives about what robots can do, and also to put them in a context where we can see what they actually are capable of, right? The perfect example that we had of AlphaGo, AlphaGo can't give you a hug. It doesn't speak Japanese. It doesn't learn how to tie its shoes, right? It's been created to do something very specific. And when we imbibe this particular technology with so much grandeur, highly, highly problematic. We become inferior in relationship to the robot when we do that. So why do I care about this, I think, is the big question. I had a long introduction with some of the things that I've done in my life, and why do I care about this particular issue, right? These are some of the robots that might appear in your home. Some of them look fairly familiar. And they're being designed to do lots of different things, right? They're meant to engage with you sociologically. They're meant to hear your voice. They travel around your house, right? And people have various feelings when it comes to these machines. Some people are totally alienated. Some people are totally involved. We've seen all the memes with cats on Roombas, right, of them scrolling around your house. And so some people feel like they're imbuing character into this machine. And I know quite a few people who are very near and dear to me in my life who have felt completely alienated by technology. My dad is a great example. So when he was sick a couple years ago, he spent a long time in the hospital, and he was surrounded by heart monitors, fall detectors, breathing machines, right? These things are supposed to make him feel safe and healthy. And he felt totally alienated and afraid of them. And it was an awful thing to watch, right? Because the heart monitor shouldn't only be a heart monitor. It can make him feel secure and healthy. So my work asks the question, what can robots do? But much more importantly, how do we feel about it? Function and expression. So I think about how robots move, right? I'm a choreographer. I have a long dance background. And I think about the movement of robots and how that affects our feelings. A lot of communication is nonverbal. Actually, I would argue all communication is nonverbal, right? Because even to talk, I have to also be moving at the same time. So perhaps the correct way of posing that is that kinetics have to do with communication. So all of my work is concerned with this intersection of how do robots move and what are the stories that we tell about them. So I want to share a little bit about my experience of being the artist in residence and a research technician at the Robotics, Automation, and Dance Lab. And in the title of the Rad Lab is the word dance. It's a very human thing, right? And it's in a mechanical engineering department at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where they invented the transistor. Yeah, so this is like a dance lab with robots in Illinois. It's pretty incredible stuff. And Amy LaVeers is the director of this lab. And through the Rad Lab, we've been exploring some of these questions of how do robots make us feel? What types of stories can we tell about robots? How are human beings going to exist in the world and retain much of our humanity in relationship to these machines? And it turns out that roboticists and artists have been working together for a very long time. You could even say Da Vinci was one of them, right? This is Bot and Dolly. This was a piece that was done between the San Francisco Ballet and this sort of elevated, broad-reaching drone robotic arm. This is a piece that Amy LaVeers worked on in her PhD. It's called Automata. And what it has to do with is this particular noun looking at stylization of movement. Yeah, and then this is a piece that was by Ken Goldberg, Martin Wattenberg, and a few other folks called Bloom. And so roboticists and engineers, or roboticists and artists, have been working together for a long time, probing some of these questions. It's a very rich intersection. And in fact, we started and we embarked on this journey called Time to Compile. So I've been working with the Rad Lab now for about a year. And this is Amy, if you can see, and Sean, and this is his 360 camera, and this is a 360 view of the Rad Lab, right? So we've been working together on this piece called Time to Compile. And it's not only a performance, as you'll soon see, it is a very rich NSF-sponsored research project of thinking about how we can bring some of these questions to the fore of human, robot, and interaction. So I get to the Rad Lab, it's like June of last year. I've never been to Illinois. And I'm coming down on this plane, cornfields everywhere. I'm from Brooklyn, or I live in Brooklyn. I grew up in the Bay Area. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? What conceivable value does a dancer choreographer have to bring? I mean, I have a programming background, right? We've heard about some of the tech companies where I worked. But what conceivable value does a dancer choreographer have to bring to this robotics lab, right? So I'm feeling a lot of insecurity. I'm not really sure where I'm going to start. And the first thing that I came up with was this idea of I want to create relationship, right? So relationship between human beings, as we've so heard beautifully from Scott, is a very muddy space, yeah? And I think relationships between humans and robots are even muddier. So the first thing that I did with this robot was literally put my cheek against the screen. Very simple, right? I thought about what does it feel like to do that? What does it feel like to look at this giant manufacturing robot, 6 feet high, it's super loud, it's $30,000, it's mostly used for research and manufacturing. What can I do to be powerful in relationship to this robot? And I just went and stood next to it and just put my cheek there and tried to see what that felt like. Turns out it feels like I am very human and this machine is very unhuman, right? Seeing it from afar, maybe you're thinking, oh my God, that machine looks so personal. No. Going up, putting your cheek against the screen of a robot. It's this sensation that I am so clearly breathing and vivacious and dynamic compared to this very static, discrete, functionally operational machine. And it totally made me think, oh my gosh, I'm awesome. This robot is capable of such a tiny, tiny slice of what we are capable of, right? So I've been working with dancers for a very long time, and we have these incredible modes of expressivity. We can learn so quickly. I mean, not only dancers, I think humans in general, right? We can learn so quickly. We are capable of articulating so much. We are on the order of magnitudes. I mean, Amy's done quite a bit of work on this expressivity index, but we're on the order of trillions and trillions and trillions, magnitudes of complexity. Robots right now are like a C. elegans, which is a worm the size of a comma, right? We are so dynamic when compared to these very static, discrete machines. And people need to recognize that, because otherwise we wind up into these deep, dark narratives of everything is coming to destroy me. So I learned how to program this robot, and the first thing that I felt was I'm really not scared of any of these, right? Fear is not the only option when it comes to robots. And believe it or not, I was having a discussion with Amy about this. Because this robot is mostly used for manufacturing and research, I think it is likely that I'm the only person that's ever put my cheek to it. I mean, that might be real. It's very highly likely. But this is me programming the robot. This is my first week in the Rad Lab. So I'm thinking about how do I create relationships with these machines? How do I become relevant in this context? And the next thing I did was start to work with this small robot called the Now. Some of you might have seen this. This is a robot that's Aldebaran, which is a French company, and then got bought by SoftBank. And I started to think about, if I mirror the movements of this robot, does that create implicit relationship? Right? So now we have two different types of relationship. One, which is proximity. Second different type of relationship, which is movement mirroring. Yeah? So I'm thinking about, how is this affecting me emotionally? Am I feeling closer to these robots? Am I feeling farther away? Am I feeling more human, less human? What's going on here? And this idea that somehow mirroring the movement of a robot would make me feel something, I think is very relevant, because people, anytime you're engaging with a new piece of technology, you are adapting to that technology. You are becoming more discrete in order to be able to use it, right? I don't really like typing like this. What if I could type like this, right? I don't really like hitting my smartphone like this. I kind of look like a dinosaur. What if when I made a phone call, I said, Siri, please call Mary Stapleton Mobile, right? It would be a totally different life experience than if I go through my whole existence cowed over, head down, neck forward. Every single time I'm interfacing with a new piece of technology, I am adapting how I function in order to suit the needs of that particular interface. I think a lot about the ethics of what that is, right? Who designed this? Why do I have to move and work the way that they want me to? This menu of choices, yeah? Who's a part of determining those answers? So the next thing I did is I thought about, what if I could create implicit relationship just through this idea of intimacy, right? So now we have three types of relationship. We have one, which is proximity, the second one, which is mirroring, and the third one, which is like replication of societal norms, yeah? And so I pick up this Now robot, which, believe it or not, everyone thinks this robot is very cute. I think it is too. I pick up this Now robot, and I wrap myself in the arms of Dexter, and suddenly this becomes very familiar, right? Who's still scared of the robot? Same goes for here. if I touch my hand to something, if I get down to the level of the robot, does that still make this robot kind of like this incredibly sentient, capable, amazing thing? Not really, right? And this storytelling made its way into not only the piece of Time to Compile, but also the work that I started to do with the Rad Lab students. So there are, I think in the realm of about a dozen students, from undergrads all the way up till PhD students, who are working in the robotics, automation, and dance lab. And I decided, well, I worked with Amy, and we really created sort of a plan for this, that we were going to teach movement class to these engineers 4 days a week for a month. And this is what it looked like. A lot of you are probably still asking the question, like, why is movement class relevant for engineers? Like, what is that about? I totally don't get it. It's really weird. This is a task where one of them had to act like a broom. And they both chose these kind of different renditions of what a broom would look like, right? Some people were standing, some people were on the floor. And it's because if they're going to be designing control systems and robots that are supposed to interface with human beings, they need to understand the humanity of themselves. I cannot underscore that enough. If we're going to have a movement vocabulary to be able to build robots that are skimming through your house or picking you up out of a nursing home and taking you somewhere to use the bathroom, we need to have a shared lexicon, a shared vocabulary that brings together these fields of dance and engineering, right? You say non-determined, I say improvisation. Same thing. We're just using different ways to talk about it. And so we're thinking about some of this frustration. I'm teaching these movement classes. This is still my first couple weeks in the Rad Lab. And I'm like, I have to make a piece, right? We have to make an art piece. It's called Time to Compile. And some of these major themes start to emerge, the first one of which is this idea of, are humans becoming more robot-like, or are robots becoming more human-like? So I initially posed this question of, are robots becoming more human-like? And Amy was like, oh my God, you're crazy. Robots are going to take so long. They have like joint angles and sensors and computers and all these things that need to be hardwired and put together. And it's going to be a long time before they become really human-like. We, on the other hand, adapt, change, and mold ourselves as quickly as we possibly want to be able to use the next application, right? So it's the same idea of basically, are we imbibing humanity into machines, or are humans imbibing machine-like qualities into us? And this second piece starts to emerge, which is that this hidden human network, right? A perfect example is this IBM Watson. They put him in commercials and elevators, and it's got this totally human voice, and it's providing all of this descriptive information. And at the same time, it's just a bunch of algorithms that have been written by people with a couple of animations, right? Watson is not sentient. Watson doesn't have feelings. To my Descartes question, Searle is a great person for you to read. Where did she go? Yes. So we need to deface this idea that machines are this totally magical, omnipresent, highly capable entities, yeah? And recognize what really is driving some of these things. And then this third theme starts to emerge, which is the idea of time to compile. So if I create a dance right now on a human being, and I decide that this is my dance, it just compiled, right? I just did it for you. You all saw it. Here's a dance. It's so hard to do that with a robot. It takes forever to choreograph a robot. Anytime I get in front of a computer, anytime I grab one, anytime I move around with something, it takes forever for that robot to stop being error-prone. So we have this mass discrepancy between what humans can do and what robots can do in different periods of time. So we have these three themes, and we start to take this piece all over, right? We're going to Brown, we're going to Connecticut College, we have these big invitations to be in Toronto and Italy and different places in the next few months. And at the same time, we're thinking, this is all well and good. We love showing different pieces to audiences. But at the end of the day, we want to understand how this is really changing your minds, right? I opened with this big thing about narrative and how important story is in dictating the way that we feel and act. So we want to know at the end of the day, like, how is this actually affecting people? So there's this question of, can we create a Turing test for a moving audience participant? So if I asked one of you to come up and move around with a robot, would you know if the robot is being controlled by a human being on the other end or by an algorithm, which, per my conclusion earlier, is also a human being but is an algorithm? So we have this idea of, can we create a Turing test for a live embodied audience participant as a way of learning how you think and feel about robots and how those thoughts and feelings can be changed. And we created this thing called the loop. This is Eric in the middle. It's so dark. I don't know if you guys can really see him, but the Baxter robot is moving around, and Eric is standing in front of it, and all we said to Eric was mirror the movements of the robot, right? So Eric starts moving around, he's mirroring the movements of the robot, and I am very surreptitiously standing behind him, moving around in a motion capture suit, right? So I'm copying what Eric's doing, Eric is copying what the robot is doing. Is the robot being controlled by a human or by an algorithm? We don't know. Same goes for Umer, who's in VR right now. Umer is seeing a VR avatar, and he's mirroring the movements of the avatar, right? So we're giving Umer an embodied movement task, and he's mirroring the movements of the avatar. And then this is Ashan, who's sitting behind everyone, making sure that it all still runs. So what was interesting about this? What did we learn from this? Basically what we did is we interconnected every output and every input such that we had this gigantic loop of moving people. So here's Eric dancing around in front of the Baxter. Here's me behind him. My motion is being extrapolated, put into Umer's glasses. Umer is watching it. Umer's motion is being extrapolated, put into the Baxter. And so we have this big, long, moving loop of human beings and robots all doing the same movement at the same time. What's a real-world example of that? Skype? The internet? Anytime you text someone, right? We all have this movement engagement that is mediated by machines. And so this is what we wound up creating as sort of an embodied performative installation. And of course, it got a little complicated. This is just an idea of what that three-pronged loop looks like. This could theoretically, in our perfect version, be 9, 10, 12 versions long, and we would have this giant circle of moving machines and bodies that are all completely interconnected. This is a very demo type video of what that looked like in rehearsal. So this is, you can't really see this one as well, but that's Cameron following the robot, me following behind Cameron, Ashan, who's way back there in VR. I think it's too dark to be able to see. And then the robot obviously moving as a result. So we wind up with this very broad, long movement trajectory and this thing that we call the loop. So we took this all over, too. We've taken this to a couple of different places. And the question that we always ask people is, how does this change your mind about humans and about robots? And why does this art piece matter for the field of robotics, right? Someone's bringing me to Illinois. Someone's paying for me to be there. Someone's taking us to all of these different places. The economics are real. And the research value that we've started to come up with is kind of multi-pronged. So time to compile is simultaneously art, commercialization, and research. This is Alex. She's doing an embodied movement exercise with a Now robot. And we provide the robot in a few different shapes and forms, right? We put it in a two-dimensional form, very big, put it in a two-dimensional form, very small, and then actually have it in front of her. And we see how size affects her feeling and perception about the robot. So this is a user study that's being run through an NSF, or will be run, through an NSF grant, which is trying to understand how we will perceive robots in our homes, right? So there's tremendous research value. We literally exported this directly from the loop and turned it into a research study. This is me sort of providing a live demo of what this looks like. And some people might still have the question in the back of your mind, so what does this have to do with research? Art is about making experiences for audiences. Research is about measuring experience. If we are going to understand how people feel about robots, we need to be able to create experiences that are as rich as the ones that they have seen in the movies and on the news. So the research studies that I make and that we design at the Rad Lab have this in the back of our minds. This is another research study that we did. It's measuring power, valence, and acceptability. So we put some of these binaries up. That's Ashan in the upper right corner and Amy in the upper left. Amy's the director of the Rad Lab, and Ashan's a graduate student. We put some of these binaries up for people, and we asked them, what seems more positive? What seems more powerful? What would you rather have in your house? And then we asked them the same question after the show. And we asked them the same question after they stand up and do an embodied movement exercise with these robots. How do you think some of these parameters change? right? Narrative has so much to do with your perception of new technology, and it is such an important skill in terms of bringing humanities very tangibly into the STEM fields, right? Out of all these user studies, we started to come up with this idea of creating a robot that was much more expressive, inspired by some of these ideas around character, bilateral symmetry, right? And we are in the throes of thinking about commercializing this. So we have this big grant from the NSF where we're going to travel all over and do customer interviews and see if people would be interested in a different type of robot. Yeah, so time to compile winds up being 3 big things: art, research, and product, commercialization. And all of those things are completely interrelated, right? Like, this is what a lot of our experience looks like with machines. And it doesn't always have to be this way. If we can explore some of these topics from a totally different point of view. And I want to end really briefly on kind of a personal story as to how we got here, or at least for me, how I got here. And inspiring you to think about some of the skills that you have and the experiences that you can bring to fields as your onlyness, right? So I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Berkeley, California. In the midst of the tech boom, I got my first computer when I was 9 years old. It was an E-machine computer. I don't know if any of you know what an E-machine is. It got absorbed. Oh, am I off? Oh, thanks. An E-machine computer. You can actually just, yeah. Thanks. I got it when I was 9 years old. It was absorbed by Dell. Yeah, it was like one of the early kind of company. And I loved this computer. Like, I learned how to play Minesweeper on it and do AOL chat. And I felt really invigorated by the idea that I could affect the world and communicate with other people through technology. And then I felt totally alienated about the idea that I could be a programmer. Because culturally, when you looked in the news and on TV and in the media what those people looked like, none of them looked like me, right? I'm like goofy, loud. My dad's from Cuba. My mom's from upstate New York. Like, I am not what programmers are supposed to be, right? So I created this narrative of my head that I could never be a part of science and engineering. Yeah, and it stayed that way for a long time until I got to college, and I was like, well, my mom studied business, and I love to dance, so I'm going to study business and dance. Just sort of happened, right? Like, you have these experiences that just take you from one step to the next. And I'm in college, and I'm studying business and dance, and I'm still like, but I want to be working with technology. I want to be doing all of the exciting, cutting-edge things that people are doing in Silicon Valley. And I had been telling myself this defeatist narrative, this story about who I could be and what I could do in the world that existed from nowhere. It just existed from the movies and the media and the news and all the things that I had seen that told me I couldn't do that. Not true. And so I started interning at some of these tech companies. I really tried to insert myself in that universe. And I moved to New York City with a very hardcore full-time job working at Bain & Company as a management consultant, right? And I knew in the back of my mind that was never going to be my real life. But it is so hard to be brave when all you ever see are things that are not what you look like and what you are trying to do in the world, right? And I quit that job and I just started dancing full-time. And I knew that there would be some sort of universe where I could bring all of this stuff together, where I could bring my desire for making empathetic, ethical technologies and my desire for being creative and expressive and dynamic and being a dancer, and where I could bring my desire of working with young people and working with, you know, humans who are sitting at this edge of creating new technology. And I knew that that could happen at some point. But if you don't know what it looks like, it's really hard to be brave, right? And when I wound up coming to the Rad Lab, I felt that it was this conglomerate of people who totally understood the value in engineering and science and the value in something like art and dance. And I decided, not only then, but a couple points before that, that fear never was going to be my path, right? Fear, all it does is it encourages exclusivity. It maintains the status quo. It means that you'll never get to be a part of the things you want to be a part of. And so if I have a take-home message, it really is the desire and the chutzpah and the strength that you need to be brave. Everybody has it, right? It's just a matter of how you choose to express that bravery. And I think when we talk about humanities and engineering and innovation, as Scott put so beautifully, it really is so much of the same thing. You have a vision and a goal for what you want the world to look like. And you take steps towards making that goal appear. Whether you do it through a dance, whether you do it through an algorithm, whether it's a novel or a machine, you're all contributing to some semblance of the future. And so I want to encourage, especially my scholarship folks, to think about what are the stories that you tell yourself of what you can and cannot do. Where did you hear those stories? Where did they come from? Did they come from the 80% of the terrifying robot movies that you've seen before? From the 72% of the Google top 50 searches on robots that are all violent robots? Where did they come from? Where did you learn what was and wasn't okay? Where did you learn that it wasn't valid to be a dancer in a robotics lab? Why did I feel that insecurity? Where did that come from? Right? Because all it does is preserve very particular hierarchies about how the world functions. And the whole point of being in university, and I think learning new things, is to expose yourself to what else possibly exists. So this fall, I'm going to be a PhD student at Stanford in mechanical engineering. And I come from a business and dance background, right? But stories that we tell about robots are a part of robotics. Feelings that humans have about robots are a part of robotics. It's human-robot interaction. It's all the same thing. So if I can say one last note here, it's that inclusion is not only a buzzword. It takes a long time, it takes a lot of bravery, and it takes a lot of people bringing whatever skills, experience, and goals and visions that they have to the table. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. That was fantastic. Listening to your talk and the talks earlier today and yesterday, and the focus on storytelling and challenging ourselves for experiences, left me with the following question. What role do you see for people who are not students anymore, people who are mid-career, in the twilight of their career, moving on to different challenges? You know, we haven't grown up in the tech world, but many of us are very comfortable in it. We've had experiences, we have stories to tell. We've had challenges and questioned things that we were told we could or couldn't do. In addition to the wonderful students who are here today embarking upon their careers, what role do you see the rest of the community playing in this tech and humanities world?
Thank you so much for your question. This is something I think about a lot because both coming from the background that I come from with my three parents who are very much, I would say, tech literate to a degree, right? So they have a good understanding of how to use their phones and email and that sort of thing. But they're also feeling kind of alienated by a lot of these devices, and they don't necessarily know what type of insight they can offer. I think a few things. So some of the authors that I've read in this field that don't necessarily have a tech literate background, like an E.O. Wilson, for example, sort of look at the lens of whatever it is they do through the broader historical context of how technology exists in society. Yeah, so one example I can think of is a good friend of mine who's based out of Brown. His name's Peter Haas, and he was a person who came from a statistics background. He came at the field of computation and engineering as a total outsider, and he said, I just have some curiosities. I have some things that I want to read about, right? And started to become involved at sort of like a very surface level, and then started writing to people whose work that he thought was interesting. I think that's something that I sort of recommend for anyone who's interested in being a part of the tech and humanities literacy community. I actually wrote, after the election in 2016, to a lot of political scientist because I wanted to more accurately understand what had happened. Yeah, I mean, please, I don't need to apologize for my politics. I grew up in Berkeley. I live in Brooklyn. I feel like it's pretty obvious where I sit on the line. But I felt very alienated, right? I felt very alienated from the political landscape, and I just started writing to a bunch of professors and people who were intellectual leaders in the field, and I said, I'd like to understand what you think happened, and they all wrote me back. So something that I say to my dad just sent me an email the other day, and he was like, what if artificial intelligence isn't to replace the human brain, but it's to supplement the human brain? I said, Dad, this is great. You should write to a bunch of professors who are in AI and just tell them your thoughts. They'll all listen to you. I mean, I think people are really thrilled to know that you're being engaged in their work, right? That's one suggestion I guess I could make. I think the second one is to try to gather as much information as possible that doesn't only come from certain sources. Something that's really frustrating to me is I feel like Twitter, social media, everything's very myopic. International news outlets write about these things in a very different way than US news outlets do. I mean, Japan, England, China, the Netherlands, they all have very different perceptions of robots than what we read about in the news. I think that's something that has been tremendously valuable to me. And then I also feel like there's this idea, and Andra sort of touched on this beautifully, of like ageism in technology, which I find also really silly and frustrating because I actually think most of the wisdom sits at the farther end of the age spectrum. I think so many people in my generation lack emotional intelligence, sort of lack ethics and morals. I mean, again, grew up in the Bay Area. I see a lot of tech company CEOs who, I don't mean to vilify them in any way, I think are lacking tremendously in understanding my worldview, for example. And I'm probably about the same age as they are. Yeah, so I think that there's sort of this prevailing idea of ageism in technology, which I find really awful. And if it's not, I want to go start a new career in technology, I think there's something to be said about either writing to academics or speaking publicly about some of your sentiments and just saying that, hi, I'm a person who lives in this place, and this is sort of my outlook, and I want to be able to share it with people. Because I think we've become so myopic about what some of these systems and people are. It's a very long-winded answer, which I don't know was very helpful to you. But I think I really encourage people to start voicing whatever alt opinions might exist, because otherwise we have one stream of consciousness, and that's not how humans are. Yeah.
You are my dream come true. One of the things that I would hope a robot can do is learn the 108 Tai Chi moves so that I can follow him or her around and finally learn them and put them together. Because I've been studying this for many years and I still can't do the whole thing. So that would be one thing that you're combining is choreography and technology. How far is that dream of mine from achievement?
I'm going to repeat your question to you because I just want to make sure we're on the same page. You've been studying Tai Chi for quite a long time.
Yeah, and there are 108 moves, not all unique. There are, I think, 66 unique moves in the Tai Chi, in the practice that I use, which is Taoist Tai Chi. And I go to a class. There is a teacher, and we follow him. Without him, there's no way we would know how to do it. And so I would like a robot that knows, learns how to do this. And then, because this is a practice that we're supposed to do every day, at least once. And it's great for health, particularly people my age. It's really very helpful. And it would be great if that were available.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I love that. And I have to say also, I love that you're thinking about doing Tai Chi with a robot, because I think half the time when I tell people I dance with robots, they're like, oh, that's so weird. And I'm like, I actually really love doing it because I love the idea of constraint and that the robot can only move in a certain way. And usually choreographically, like, you have more possibilities than you can handle. So I think Andra had really beautifully that slide of sort of showing maturity and where we are in the scope of robotics. I don't know if I have a great time horizon of when a Tai Chi robot will appear, but I think that Baxter, which has now been around for I think 6 or 7 years, robots like that are easily programmable by holding them and moving them, should start to become more widely available. My guess would be in maybe the next 3 or 5. I also think that you could create a video of yourself and guide yourself and do a little duet between the two of you, doing Tai Chi anytime you so choose. And I wonder if, whether it's a robot or not, I'm curious to know if you would care about how big or small it is. Uh-huh. No, the reason I'm asking is because this is completely fascinating to me, right? That the idea of like having this with doing Tai Chi with a robot rather than with a screen or a video of yourself or a friend is, and maybe because it's 3D and it's an actuated body, yeah. That will be our next commercialization avenue. Tai Chi robot.
Now, something that's critical to like humans and their evolution was the relationships that they had with animals through the course of their history, and how we co-evolved and started to grow together. So part of me is curious, do you ever see like a future where we can see robots get to like such a normalized and natural state and so standardized in our lives that we could potentially like co-evolve with them? Or do you think that their synthetic and like abiotic nature will continue to, I guess, like inhibit that?
Yeah, great question. So my next residency that starts at the end of TED is a ThoughtWorks Arts residency, and they have worked with a group called the Cyborg Foundation. And you might want to look them up. They install sensors inside of their bodies, right, to try to create synesthesia. There's another woman who installed a sensor in her foot so that she can feel earthquake tremors more readily inside of her body, even if they're not detectable. So I think there's certainly like a little bit of symbiosis from an artistic or philosophical point of view that's already happening, right, if you so choose. For me, the question is not so much like, are we going to co-evolve? Robots don't come into existence without human beings. Humans make robots, right? So if we want a robot that can do or perform a certain function, I think that that's completely feasible in the near future. I would like to see research studies, anyone who's working within the mechanical engineering field, that basically says that a robot will then decide how to create oneself and imbue certain functions within the robot, which I would then deem to be truly evolution, right? Something that happens sort of by natural progression. But I don't necessarily, are you imagining some sort of like superhuman singularity robot race that's combined of these two entities?
No, I'm just thinking like how, like if there's a point where our reliance on robots, if they do reach like that really like high quality state, would have an effect on our evolution.
Have an effect on our, well, I think this is great because you're telling a story about the future, right? And future stories about the future are going to be inherently high, how would I say this? Because we don't know what they are yet, and we haven't seen that part of history, stories about the future are always going to be elevated in terms of narrative, context, possibility, et cetera. I think there's that great quote about we underestimate technology in the long term and we overestimate it in the short term, right? And that's where these stories about what can happen with robots actually can really come down to dictate how we think and feel and what we do. Like Stanley Kubrick's 50th anniversary, 2001: A Space Odyssey just came out, or not just came out, the anniversary just happened. And so many things that appeared in that movie now exist in real life because people make what they imagine. So if you imagine this narrative of humans are going to become dependent on robots because they will have evolved so far, that's a narrative that you might work towards happening inside of your work, right? Something interesting to think about.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It's just so interesting. To give you a brief insight into why some people may feel more afraid of robots than death, it's a quality of life and not wanting to give up eye contact and flesh-touching, sensual life, the trees, the grass, stones, bugs, not wanting to give that up for something synthetic and something digital. And so that's it's an age thing probably, but that just I wanted to express to you what might be going on there. And my question in connection with that is, can't the robots be made more beautiful and more aesthetically pleasing and more touchy-feely and more lovely?
Yes, so thank you so much. I know Andra mentioned yesterday the Disney 12 laws of how they design robot or any animated character. They have these like 12 things that they've picked up on that will immediately create empathy, the bilateral symmetry of the eyes, moving in a certain way. I could not agree more. So a major question that I have, if I want to buy a robot and I'm a woman, who made a robot that's for me to buy? Nobody, right? Like all of these robots that I work with have biceps. They all have masculine names. Their vocal inflections, again, whether it's in a servile mode or a dictative mode, have been divided, right? So who made a robot that's for me? If I want to go out and buy 10 robots, where are they? No one's made them for me, right? Like there's a huge opportunity there. What do women want out of robots? Big question. Who's answering that right now? Genuinely, please tell me. Because if I look at all the people who are employed by Boston Dynamics, nobody looks like I do, right? And so I think that there is actually a huge opportunity for people who come from artistic, psychological, philosophical fields to contribute to this very idea. Oh my gosh, what if I had a robot that brought me flowers? What if I had a robot that we go out into the garden and the grasslands and it finds where the glass is and it picks it up so I don't scratch my feet, right? Isn't that a kind of a beautiful vision for a robot? I don't see that on the media. I don't see that in the news, and no one's making that robot, right? And so I completely agree with you, and I feel like we are seeing this narrow slice of what robots can be in the world, what they can do, based on not only who makes them, but the stories that we tell about them. Right? I have this like good friend of mine, Ariane. She has a 4-year-old son named Everest, and he just recorded this long voice memo to me. Catie, I want to make a robot that goes around Central Park and picks up all of the trash. Because I go to Central Park, I'm 4 years old, and there's trash everywhere, and I don't like that. Will you help me make that robot? Oh my gosh, what a better vision for a robot than the Terminator, right? Like, this is where... And it like seems like humor, but we create what we imagine. The stories we tell ourselves is what winds up happening. And actually, we're kind of trying to submit this giant NSF grant to just create a big space where people can go and move around with robots that aren't scary. Because I think some of this fear is also because you've never had an experience with so it's like fear of the unknown, fear of the narrative, and fear of what could occur in the future. And no one else, I would love to see the example of someone who has created a robot that will only pick daisies and bring them to you.
Thank you so much again.